Welcome to my waffle square, where I obsess about things, and you get to benefit from it. So if you clicked on this video, I imagine you're like me and you're trying to figure out why your son or daughter's RZR 170 won't start. Well, there's three main components or factors to an engine running, right? We have fuel, we have compression, and if you're not running a diesel, you have ignition. So in this video, I want to go step by step diagnosing the fuel system and the ignition system. And a little hint, this guy's got problems with both of those. So let's roll it in the garage and get started. So the spark plug is where the fuel system and the ignition system meet. So the first thing we want to do to assess both issues is take a look at that spark plug. And to do that, we have to remove it. So right behind the passenger seat, right in between the fender here and this tire, we head back to the crankcase, and you can see right there in the center of the screen, that is the spark plug wire. We just pull that out. Get that out of the way. And that is the tip of our spark plug. It takes a 5/8 inch deep socket wrench to remove that guy. So let's do that next. All right, coming in between the back tire and the shock is the angle that I found that is best. Boom, just like that. And there we go. I like these spark plug sockets because they'll hold the spark plug from falling to the ground. Let's take a look at it. So I took the spark plug out because it's supposed to be the window to a vehicle's soul. And look at all that black sooty carbon all over it. That's a new spark plug too. So I Googled the causes. A black feathery carbon deposit on your spark plugs can be an indication of a weak spark or an overly rich fuel mixture. Causes may include a stuck choke, misadjusted or heavy carburetor float, a leaky injector or carburetor needle valve, low coil output, or high resistance in your spark plug wires. The first thing I want to do is rule out that it's a problem with the spark. So let's clean this guy off and then check it for spark. So we have the spark plug wire here. I cleaned off the spark plug and I've got it set against the crankcase, and I checked and made sure that the engine is properly grounded to the battery by putting the red lead of a voltmeter on the battery and the black lead over here to ensure that I got 12 or 13 volts, which I did. I've got this guy pressed against the metal, so that should give us a spark right here. I've got Aspen, my little helper, so I can actually see along with you. Aspen, give it a crank a few times. Once more. I don't see any spark. Let me get something plastic to push against there. All right, well, let me make sure that we've got metal on metal contact with this little plastic piece. Go ahead, baby. Once more. Nope, I don't see a spark. Well, there we go. So did you have a spark? Well, if so, just keep watching. We're gonna roll right into fuel system delivery. No spark? You might want to skip to this spot right here where we start diagnosing the ignition system. So coming in from the passenger side, let's go over a few key components. First of all, this guy right here is the choke. On really cold starts, you need to pull that choke all the way out. Once it's to idle, it should be all the way in or close to that, and that's where you generally want to run it, and it should run its best warm with no choke at all. If you don't already know, you have to push the brake down while you try to start the engine. And now let's head out, and right by the passenger seat here, this is your gas tank right there. Straight down from that, this is the fuel selector. There's a little arrow right here, and there's an on and an off written right on the fuel selector. So the on should be pointing towards the arrow. If you look at yours and it's turned up like that, your gas is turned off, and that could be an easy fix. Now directly back from that, behind the rear passenger tire, is this. This is the fuel pump. There's a line coming in from the gas tank. Then behind this one, right back in here, there is a line that is heading to the fuel filter and the carburetor. And this one right here heads right over here to the crankcase, and that is supplying the suction to draw the fuel up in through this fuel pump and over towards the filter and the carburetor, basically. Quick word about fuel. So the shelf life of regular gasoline is 3 to 6 months. Therefore, if your RZR's been sitting around for that time or longer without running, the gasoline inside could be stale, and that's very bad on the engine, or at least it won't run very well. So if there is a lot of gasoline in here that's very old, you may want to consider removing it. I got underneath this guy and I couldn't find an actual drain plug. Let me know in the comments if you know where it is. But I do have this guy right here that is for removing brake fluid from the master cylinder when you flush the whole system out. I recently did that with all of our vehicles. So you could do that, and if there's only a small amount of gasoline in there, then like a professor taught me in college, dilution is the solution to pollution. So in other words, dilute that bad gas with a bunch of fresh gas. And in this case, that's what I did, so I'm not going to be draining anything. Let's go back and test the fuel pump. If you were just looking at the pump or wanting to work on the pump, you could probably get to it from behind the fender in there, but I'm going to take the seats out and take this panel off. It's actually pretty easy, and it's going to give us a whole lot more space and also much better camera angles. So the front seat, the driver's seat, excuse me, there's a little lever that you push and slide it forward just like on any other car. So you slide that forward and it just comes right off. If you weren't already aware, that's where the battery's located. Passenger seat has two 12mm bolts under here that get removed, and that frees the seat to be removed straight out. This panel is a combination of 10mm bolts as well as the little push pin remover for plastic panels in a car. After removing all of those, you can just slide this panel right out and set it aside. All right, let's get our bearings. So these 2 points here are where the passenger seat connects into. So be right behind where the passenger seat would be is what we're looking at. Down here is the actual fuel pump. The line coming up from the fuel pump to the filter is right here. Here is the fuel filter. This is not the original. I have changed this one out. This one actually came with the carburetor, and I'll show you that a little bit later. But over from the filter, right here behind this stuff is the actual carburetor itself. More on that a little later. And by the way, this is the starter. Now I've recently replaced the starter because the kids burned it out, and so did I, trying to assess what was wrong with everything. If you have any interest in seeing how I replace that starter, let me know in the comments. There are other videos out there that you could find, but I'd be happy to do that for you. So let's start by testing just the fuel pump, not the fuel going through the filter in case the filter is clogged. And to do that, we want to take off this little pin right here. You just squeeze it, and you can move it back along the hose, or in this case, it actually just comes off this way. I'm gonna get this little cup right here to try to catch any gas coming out of that filter so we're not making a mess. There we go. All right, one hand on the brake, the other one engages the starter, and let's see if we can get some fuel to come out. So there is fuel coming out of there, but that looks like it's pretty low production. So I think it would be interesting to switch out that fuel pump for another one. All right, looking in from the back wheel, here is our pump. There are the hoses that need to be removed, and then two 10mm bolts. So let's get the hoses first. Once again, you're just simply pinching them. I have a little pan down underneath to catch any gasoline that comes out. Okay, there's that one. This is the breather tube, or vacuum tube. And now the one going from the gas tank. Oh, let's turn off the fuel. There we go. There. All right, two 10mm bolts. Well, here's the original, and here's the new one by Most Plus. I'll leave a link for it in the description. You can see they're almost exactly the same, so that's pretty cool. All right, let's bolt it in and then hook up all the lines. Pull that off, deca in. Next we'll put in the fuel line, since it's a little further back than the vacuum line. I gotta reach in there, put the clamp on, just like that. And then our vacuum line goes right here. Clamp that down. Now the manual says to make sure none of the lines are kinked. So you trace them with your eyes and with your fingers, make sure there's no crisscross crinks in there anywhere. All right. Now let's test and see if we get more fuel production. Oh, we gotta turn the gas on. Here we go. Oh yeah. That's a lot more coming out. All right. The next step would be to disconnect this hose on the outflow side of the fuel filter from the carburetor and do the same flow test to make sure that it's not clogged. In our case, I've already replaced this one. It's fresh and clean, so I know it produces well. Now, if this solves your problem and it fires right up, will you please give this video a like, and that would be really helpful. I'll leave a link to the fuel pump down below. That's only a $13.50 item. Now, in our case, we're not gonna stop there. For the purpose of this video, I also elected to move on to the next step, which is to replace the carburetor, and that is a $28 item. There is no rebuild kit for the carburetor, sadly, so it's just part swapping. And we're gonna do that next. After a few days, the new carburetor I ordered came in. Let's take a look at it. First, it comes with its own fuel filter, which is fantastic. Now, I'm really not happy with the packaging, because look at this, it completely crimped one of the hoses. Luckily, that's just the one that drains it, and there's not much room for it anyway. But everything else seems to be functional and intact. Let's switch it out. Since the carburetor's right back there, I'm gonna take this panel off right here. We might end up taking this big one off if we need to get down to it, but I think I can reach through. So just like the panel behind the seats, we have 10mm bolts. There's actually 6 of those, and a couple little pop outs, one on each side. Looks like there's a Phillips screw right here that's holding this guy in place. I got it. Looking in from the back wheels, we can see the carburetor right here. There's a little breather tube kind of in the way, but we'll be able to get to it no problem. Now this aluminum pipe you see here is an aftermarket K&N air inlet with an exposed filter up top. And that's held on just by this little clamp right here. And then we have a little 1/4 inch hose clamp right here that is heading into the engine crankcase. So let's take those two off, and then right up here we'll also untwist this little guy which has the throttle cable going into it. That. All right. Well, that came off super easy. Let's unhook the throttle cable, the gas inlet, and the choke. All right. Right there is the choke cable. Let's loosen this guy up that's actually holding the outer shell of the cable. Got a little jar again for the fuel line. Let's pull that guy off. Okay. Then we can get in here and let's undo the throttle cable. There. Let me get in here this other direction so you might be able to see. There. Okay, there's a spring and then this piece here. We want to pull all that out. I don't see any reason why we can't reuse that if it's in good shape. Now the only thing left holding it on is right here. And I've loosened that plenty. As you can see it just spinning freely. So let's see if we got better leverage over here to pull that off. And if not, there's a couple nuts here that we can take off. Yeah, that really doesn't want to come off. So maybe we'll just take these two off. I bet you they're 10 millimeter. Yep, 10 millimeter. All right. So here's the two carburetors side by side. We just have to take off this little piece and transfer it over here. And you can see with the exception of the dirt, these things are practically identical. All right, this is the air inlet. It looks like when they did the K&N conversion, they just cut off the original and just left enough for it to clamp onto. So we're going to need that part. Finally, all right. Let's get this guy popped on here. There we go. All right, that is plenty tight. This whole assembly here is doing great for the choke. I think I'm just gonna loosen this one though so we can get that choke cable in there pretty easy. There we go. And I might as well pull that guy off. I'm not too worried about dirt getting in there at this point. There's a little O-ring here. I'm going to lubricate that with just a little drop of oil, just so it gets a good seal, since that's heading into the crankcase, and that is creating suction to draw the gasoline vapors into the engine. We want to make sure that's a good seal. All right, we're ready to put it back. Oh, one more thing. This whole assembly here, I checked the other one and it's all in good shape. There's no wear on this little needle or anything like that. So I'm just going to use the existing one since the throttle cable is already into this little linkage down there. I checked and this gasket is still up on the original one and it looks fine. So let's leave all that out of the way. And now we're ready. All right, let's see if we can go through this a little quicker now, since you already watched me take it off. First thing I want to do is get it right back onto those two bolts, just like that. Let's hand tighten those 10mm nuts. Good. Now let's put the throttle cable in. This little guy here has to twist in a specific way for it to go all the way down, just like that. There we go. There we go. Let's test that with the gas pedal. I can hear it in there, so that sounds good. All right, let's do the choke cable next. Now we got to get this guy into that little hole. So if we turn it up, pivot this on the wire, slip it in like that. Boom. Okay. Next step is to get the end of that cable into that spot where we can clamp it down with the Phillips head screw. Now let's test that by pulling the choke out. Yeah. Good. All right. See this rubber piece for the intake, the air intake? Make sure that's not rubbing against this part of the choke, or it'll make it stick. That's working good though. Okay, next let's do that real easy breather tube. That one's right here. All right. Let's weave the gas line in there. Boom. Now we got to get that little clip. Okay, that's just about everything on this side. So now we had loosened this little clamp. See how loose that is? It's just kind of wobbling around. Let's tighten that one with our 1/4 inch. All right, that's plenty tight. And lastly, let's get this air inlet into place. One last check of that choke, make sure that's not interfering anymore. Nope, it's still good. All right. So that solve your problem? If so, could you please give this video a thumbs up? I'd really appreciate it. If not, and you have adequate spark, then maybe you've got some sort of compression issue going on. Well, now we're at the point in the video where we're going to start diagnosing the ignition system. First step in diagnosing the electrical system is to start right here with the spark plug. It's all cleaned up and we need to test the resistance between the stud and the electrode. So I've got this awesome little Kaiweets multimeter. It actually has an automatic function. It can just sense what you're wanting to do. So if you put it on the terminals of a battery, it'll sense DC. If you put it in a wall, it'll sense the AC. In this case, it's going to sense that we're wanting to check ohms of resistance. We should get that same green light and tone when we touch one end to the stud and the other end to the electrode. Let me get it down there. There we go. So we know all the way down the spark plug is good, and obviously this whole area here is basically one piece, so it's good too. Give me a tone, guy. There we go. All right, spark plug's good. To diagnose the electrical system, we're going to need to remove this seat so we can get to the battery, that seat so we can get to this panel, and remove that panel so we can get to all the ignition system that's running right behind these two seats. It's really not as hard as it sounds. This driver's seat, there's just a lever right down here, just like any normal car. You pull that up, slide it forward, you need some oil. There we go. There's our battery. Right underneath the passenger seat at two spots, there's 12mm bolts. That, seatbelt's out of the way, this guy just slides forward and comes off. This back panel runs from one side all the way to the other and about 3/4 of the way up down to here, and it's held on with a combination of 10mm bolts and the little pop-out little plastic retainers that are used for car door panels. So let's start removing all those. These little retainer clips, if you just start popping them out a little ways from the middle, I can then get in there with a remover tool, like a little fork. It'll pop it out the rest of the way, just like that. Gas tank. There we go. And then we just slide this guy right out. All right, let's take a look at the battery next. All right, let's get our bearings. This is where the driver's seat was. When we slid that off, it exposes the battery. We want to test the voltage of the battery to make sure that it is sufficient to operate the ignition system. 12.87 volts, that's great. Now we want to test that the engine is properly grounded, because the spark plug gets screwed basically into the engine. So let's test that. And once again, yep, 12.86 volts, 87, so we're doing great there. All right, moving on to the process, the next thing we want to do is test this guy. This is our ignition coil. So let's reposition the camera and get to that. Okay, right behind the passenger seat is this ignition coil right here. And there are two wires coming into it. One is yellow and black, the other one is green. And then heading out the other direction leads all the way down to the spark plug wire here that the spark plug head goes into. So first thing we want to do is draw back this little rubber boot, and that exposes those two wires. And look at this, black and green, and then right here black and green, so you can't screw these up when you're connecting them back. It's pretty cool. Let's disconnect those. All right. First thing we want to do is test resistance from either one of these terminals to the spark plug wire here. And according to the manual, which I'll leave a link to, that should be a reading of 8K ohms of resistance, plus or minus 20%. So we've got our little terminals here, or our little needles here that we want to probe and check with. And let's first check if there's any built-in resistance in the line. And we're showing like just a tiny bit, right? All right, so let's put one of these cool little attachments on here. Look at this little alligator clip, pushes right on here like that. I got that off of Amazon. It makes it really easy when you're doing this by yourself. Oops. So we'll set that right on there. And then the other end is going to go right into where the spark plug connects. And let's check. Yep, 7.71. So I think that's well within 20% of 8K. Very good. Now, when it comes time to test the primary, which is the resistance between these two terminals, the manual says it's supposed to be 0.2 ohms. But this little guy here doesn't seem to read down to that level. In fact, I checked the manual, it only reads down to 50 ohms. So we're going to have to switch over, unfortunately. Let's get this guy out of the way. And we'll use this one. Now, this guy, unlike the little Kaiweets one, this guy, when you check, it has, look at that, like quite a bit of built-in resistance. Remember, the other one was like 0.0001. This one's 0.2 on its own. So if we were to take this reading without checking that first, it would be off. So 0.2, 0.3. So we're looking for, what, 0.4, 0.5 when we test across here. And let's see what we get. Yeah, 0.5, 0.6. So probably within that 20% realm. So yeah, 0.5, 0.4, 0.5, there we go. So that tells us that this ignition coil is fine. Well, what if it wasn't? What if that was your problem? Well, you could go on Amazon and you can buy this perfect replacement right here for $10. And all you have to do is take an 8mm ratchet to this one bolt right here holding this in place, and clip one zip tie that's holding this wire down by where it goes into the crankcase. And you could replace that whole unit just by backing out this one bolt. But since this isn't our issue, the manual says we want to move on and test the CDI box. So let's set up for that next. All right, as we zoom in the driver's side back wheel, right in between the shock and this crankcase breather tube, and above this aluminum guy with the heat dissipation, right here we see the two plugs to the CDI box. So this is a very expensive unit. It's $226, and this is what it looks like. So we've got two plugs, and the next couple tests involve those plugs. So the first one, we want to disconnect this one over here that is the 2-wire plug. And see this brown wire right here? We need to turn on the ignition and check for voltage between that brown wire and the engine. So we're going to set our voltmeter to DC. We're going to test positive here, and then the negative is going to be on the engine. And let's see if we get voltage. All right, the CDI box is up here on a little metal flange, and it's surrounded with this rubber boot, and it'll actually slide off of that. See that little guy that's holding it in place? And that makes it a little easier for us to get access to these two plugs. So I'm going to disconnect this little guy and set up the voltmeter, and we'll come back and we'll do the test. To get this plug off, we need to bend back this little tab that releases a catch and then pull this plug out. All right, I have the red probe into that brown wire connector. I have the black probe on the engine block itself. We're set to DC volts, so let's turn the ignition key on and see if we get voltage. Yep, so that wire's not the problem. The next thing we need to do is take off this 4 plug, and we need to check continuity from this black wire to the engine ground. All right, we've got the black probe into the black wire connector. We're set to continuity test. Now I'm going to take the red probe and just touch the engine. Yep, we passed that test. So while we're here with the 4-wire plug out of the CDI box, we can test the pulsar coil resistance, which is found in the manual, and that should come out to 151 ohms plus or minus 20%. And to do that, we go blue, yellow lead, and black lead and test their resistance. .143, so that passes. Well, going down the flow chart in the manual, the next step is to go back to the ignition coil and check for continuity between the green wire, so disconnect it, and check for continuity between the green wire and the wire underneath the key ignition when you turn it to the on position. It doesn't specify which wire. I tried the green one, and that one's always grounded. There's a black one right next to it. And if we get our probe in it, when we turn the ignition on, we get the continuity. So we passed that test. So the stator, as pictured here, looks like this snowflake of little coils, and it's inside the crankcase, and as the crankcase spins, all those little transformers create electricity, just like lawnmowers and everything else that spin like that to produce their own electricity. Well, the cable that comes out of that is right here, and it comes right to this connector. And there's some tests we can do to see if the resistance is within the right parameters in there. It would be quite a job to take that crankcase apart and replace that, so let's test some resistance first. But look at this fitting and all this oil around here that has built up. It's really dirty. Now, I read in one of the forums that a lot of the times these issues can be a bad connection. And the manual states, you know, check all your connections as you go along through these tests as well. So what do you say we clean this up a little bit? I'm gonna put a rag down here and spray some cleaner on it, and let's see if we can't clean that up a bit. It can't hurt, and it's really nasty. Yeah, it's already looking better. We'll get a rag in here, wipe all this off. We can at least see the wires and the connector. And there we go. What do you know? There's actually wire colors that we can see now and test. So let's do that. To separate this connector, you lift up on the little plastic tab over here and pull it apart. And that gives us this one that's heading down to the stator. And we have a blue wire, a black wire, a yellow wire, and a red wire. And we're going to be testing 3 of those. So the first one we want to test is black to ground. So I've got one probe on the engine ground, the other one going into this black wire. And we went from 0.3, 0.4 to 0.4, 1.5 or so. So we are getting a little bit in there. So that seems all right. Next one is black to yellow, and that should be 0.9. And we're right there. And then the last one is black to red, and that should be 1.1. And we're right there. Well, that's a good thing. All right, the next test of the stator is to switch your multimeter to AC and get output readings from the stator on the yellow and the red wires. So I've got the probe into the yellow and the red probe onto the engine ground, and we should get 8 volts AC here. We're getting about 6. And then red to ground, we should get 5. And we're getting like 10, but at least it's working. All right, after cleaning up all those connections, pulling everything out, testing, putting all the connections back, just for the heck of it, I had to try sticking the spark plug in there and doing another spark test. And watch this, I'm gonna turn off the light. You see that? We're getting spark. All right, maybe it was just a bad connection all along. All right, I got everything buttoned back up. Let's see if it'll start. Hey, hey. A little something. All right, what can we do? All right. Obviously need to adjust the idle. Obviously need some idle adjustment, but Mommy's gonna run it out. Yeah! Music to my ears. Well, obviously the carburetor needs to be adjusted, but this video is going over 40 minutes already, and there's a lot of things that can be adjusted. The air-fuel mixture, which is the pilot air screw, then the idle speed. There's also the throttle needle, as I start researching, that has little tick marks in it that you can adjust. So we definitely need to break that out into another video. Now, there were 2 other tests in the ignition diagnostics that could have been performed. One on the CDI box and the other one on the pulsar coil. And both of those required this, which the manual called a peak reading adapter. But in reality, it's a DVA or direct voltage adapter. You won't find it under the term they use in the manual. But basically it plugs into your multimeter, into the positive and negative, and you use this to get peak readings that it can keep track of and give you the outcome for those tests. As you saw, we ended up fixing the problem prior to getting to those tests, so this was still coming in the mail, and this video is so long that I'm gonna forego those tests. But if you've watched this, you know where everything's located, you know how to remove those plugs, and I think you'll be able to read the manual and just get those last couple of tests done yourself if they're required. Now, normally when I obsess about something, I get focused in and I can't get out of what Brooke laughingly calls a waffle square until I solve the problem. And I have to admit that This one I went into reluctantly. I was not excited about deep diving into this. I was actually hoping the kids had outgrown it and maybe we could sell it. But the 12-year-old sees her 16-year-old sister driving now and is wanting to be a big girl. So she's taken over this guy, putting stickers and things on it. So I did have to figure it out. And I'll have to tell you, this was a really difficult fix for me because the manual assumes you know where all of these parts are. It gives you a very close-up little thing of them. It doesn't really show you what they look like or where they're positioned on the vehicle. I was crawling all over this thing having no luck. I actually had to Google the parts to find out what the replacement parts looked like so then I could then crawl around and find where each of those things were to test them. So my hope is with this video that it cuts about a week's worth of that kind of headache out of your life. And if you find it helpful, will you please give it a thumbs up and then drop a comment for me and let me know. That would be great. It would mean a lot that all the work I put into is helping others. I'm not on Facebook, but if you are, maybe you could post it and share it somewhere in a forum or a group or something where people might benefit from it. That would be awesome. And if you're in any kind of UTV forums, maybe post a link for it there as well. I would really appreciate that. I'm going to leave a link to all the items that we talked about, the replacement parts and the tools I used in the comments below. Full disclosure, those are Amazon affiliate links, so if you click on them and end up making a purchase, it won't cost you a thing, but I do get a small reward at the end of the month, and that helps to justify also the time that it took to make this video. Our next video is going to be me trying to adjust this carburetor. It's backfiring and there's a lot going on. So maybe hold off on buying a new carburetor. It might be easier after you watch that next video to just clean up the existing one you have. Maybe take it off, clean it up, take out all the needles and those sorts of jets and things and put it back together and do it that way. But we'll find out on the next video. Until then, thank you for watching.